Hi everyone, this is my presentation for EDAS 6260, the principal interview presentation. I interviewed Dean Brinkman, who is currently the high school principal at Kaleida. A little bit about Dean and his background. He taught high school social studies at Lima Central Catholic for 7 years. He was then the Dean of Academics, which is similar to a principal role, at LCC for 2 years. He then moved on to be the principal at Ottawa Elementary for 5 years, and he is now currently the principal at Kaleida High School after coming here last year. So he's had a mixture of high school and elementary experience, private versus public schools, and high needs versus high expectations. The first question I asked Dean, what challenges have you faced thus far in your career when working with students with disabilities? He said the most difficult challenges faced when working with students with disabilities is ensuring that the students are getting the education they need. He said that you need to have the whole team on board. When considering everyone, parents, administration, school psychologists, related personnel, the student themselves, a challenge that may be faced is that there may be different views of what is best for students. So you have to have the whole team on board, talking it out and making sure you're all on the same page to know what is best for that specific student. My next question, going off of that, have you faced any specific challenges when addressing the concerns of families of these students? And he said when a decision is made to change the placement of the child to a more severe disability level, conversations with parents can be very difficult. A specific challenge that Dean shared in his experience, he said a student was in a terrible car accident midway through her kindergarten year. The student spent several months in the hospital and had a traumatic brain injury and a leg amputated as a result of the accident. She went from having very little special needs to very intense special needs. So 4 years after the accident, she was put in a typical classroom with pull-out services for math and reading. But as she grew older, a decision had to be made to put her in a more specialized unit. So he kind of shared, obviously, it was a very difficult decision for not only the parents and the student, but the school as well. So, but like he said previously, they had to think about what was best for her educational needs, and that specialized unit was what was best for her. My next question, if you're faced with disciplining a student with a disability, is the punishment for that student less than it would be for a student without a disability? Dean kind of brought up what we've already discussed in class, which is that students with disabilities cannot be suspended for over 10 days out of school unless there is a manifestation hearing. The IEP team would then determine if the violation by the student was a manifestation of their disability. Dean believes that most of the time, students with disabilities are treated similarly to all other students when it comes to discipline. However, there are times where you'll need to take everything into account when assigning consequences. So he believes that he's pretty fair across the board, but he understands that if a student broke a rule or did something wrong and a lot of it had to do with that specific disability that the student has, then he keeps that in mind when kind of doling out the punishment or the consequence as well. What school resources are provided to special education students in our district? What about community resources? Dean told me that the district resources at Kaleida, we have 2 intervention specialists for our students, and we're a grade 5 through 12 building. We also share resources with other districts, such as school psychologists, speech therapists, physical therapists, and occupational therapists. We also currently have a visually impaired student who is provided with a Braille printer, special technology, and special staffing for his needs. This visually impaired student is going to be in the 6th grade. It was really interesting around this time last year, figuring out those accommodations because If we've ever had one at Kaleida, it's been a very long time since they've had a visually impaired student. So thinking about the accommodations and how they are going to make sure that that student's needs are met in the general education classroom with the special staffing obviously provided for him. And then community resources. Dean wasn't aware of specific community resources that we have here, but he did mention the several resources available through the Putnam County Educational Service Center. So he talked about like after-school programs and summer school programs that would help students with disabilities or who struggle. What types of legal issues do you think schools are most faced with in regards to special education programs? The biggest issue is making sure the school is following the IEP correctly. Like Dean said, the IEP, of course, is a legal document, so if certain resources are not provided to the student, there may be some legal issues. How can you know for sure that a student with a disability is appropriately cared for in his or her education? Now, I thought Dean's initial response was interesting. He said, you can never fully know. But he said, it's important that there is a constant line of communication between all members of the IEP team to make sure the student is getting what they need. As an administrator, in Dean's role, he says that he has to make sure the teachers have the resources that they need and also that they're utilizing those resources. IEP meetings are important, and 3-year ETR are good indicators to make sure that the student is making the gains that are expected. My next question involves professional development. What types of professional development, if any, do you think would be beneficial to our district's special education program? Like Dean said, and of course I was aware of, most of the students on an IEP are in inclusion classrooms in our district. So Dean believes that our district could actually benefit from professional development to help with more direct instruction if there are students who have a need for more direct instruction, that don't do well in the regular education classroom. He mentioned that it would also be interesting to get some PD and flexible seating options for our students. My next question, how do you feel about special education teachers and general education teachers co-teaching? Now, co-teaching, Dean did give a little bit of a background as well. It's when the special education teacher and the regular education teacher are teaching together in the same classroom to benefit all of the students. So he said co-teaching, when done correctly, is awesome. However, Dean said that he's seen it done well, but he's also seen it done poorly. For example, he shared that he's seen a supposed co-teaching situation where the special education teacher taught and the regular education teacher left and used it as a conference or prep time. He's also seen the regular education teacher teaching and the special education teacher just sitting in the back and not helping the students at all. So he shared that it can be a great resource, great use of resources, and all students in the class can benefit from differentiated learning, but when it's done correctly. Going off of the last question, what do you see as positive and negative outcomes of co-teaching? He said the positives: better differentiation for all students, least restrictive environment for students with disabilities, and more individualized instruction. The negatives, kind of like what he elaborated on in the previous question, teachers don't take equal responsibility. So obviously that could be a negative, and that could cause co-teaching to not work to its best ability. Finally, I said if there's anything else you'd like to add, or if you have an interesting story to share in relation to special education, please explain. And Dean brought up a really interesting story, which I kind of quoted him here because I didn't think I could do a better job of explaining it. So Dean's response was, in my previous job, over 20% of the students were on an IEP. The building also housed 3 specialized units for students with multiple disabilities. Many of these students were nonverbal and required very intense special services. When I was having a bad day, I would visit 2 places. One of the places I would go would be the kindergarten room to see the pure joy of the students and how excited they were about learning. The second place I would often go was the county-run specialized units within the school. The students within these classrooms had to work harder and faced many more challenges than I could ever imagine. And most of the students did it with such joy and determination. It helped to put a lot of my own challenges into a clear perspective for me, and the students that struggle the most and succeed are a true inspiration. So I thought it was really interesting that he ended the interview this way, because we can learn a lot from those students with multiple disabilities. And obviously we know that we have to take them into account, and we need to make sure that we are giving them the appropriate education that they need and that they deserve. So I thought this story was really interesting that Dean shared. So overall, that is my presentation. I really enjoyed talking to Dean and learning more about special education law and specifically special education resources and things like that in our own district. Thank you for listening.